So, there he was, our angry, unemployed, mustache-sporting art school reject, standing inside a massively crowded, extremely smoky beer hall in Munich. Thousands of exhausted working-class people were sitting at giant wooden tables, drinking heavily, and loudly complaining about the completely miserable state of the shattered German economy. Adolf saw his golden opportunity. You might expect him to politely clear his throat and gently ask for their attention. Or maybe he would stand up and sing a cheerful traditional Bavarian drinking song. But absolutely not. He angrily jumped onto a table, dramatically pulled out a loaded heavy pistol, and fired a massive, deafening shot directly into the ceiling. He aggressively announced at the top of his lungs that a glorious national revolution had finally begun and that he was personally taking over the entire government right then and there. The entire room just stopped and stared at him, in complete, agonizing, awkward silence. You could literally hear a single drop of spilled beer hit the wooden floor. People were probably looking at each other thinking, who in the world is this crazy guy? And why is he ruining my perfectly good Friday night beer time? But Adolf was completely, terrifyingly serious. He actually managed to kidnap a few highly important, bewildered Bavarian politicians who were quietly drinking in a dark back room. He violently locked them in a small side office and basically forced them at gunpoint to publicly support his totally ridiculous, poorly planned rebellion. And shockingly, it somehow temporarily worked. But the very next morning, when he tried to proudly lead a massive, glorious armed march through the main streets of Munich to finalize his total political takeover, so he predictably ran straight into a solid barricade of heavily armed state police officers. The police absolutely did not care about his grand revolutionary dreams. They immediately opened fire on the crowd. Total chaotic panic erupted in an instant. The glorious, world-changing rebellion completely collapsed in about 5 short minutes. Adolf awkwardly dislocated his shoulder in the massive crush of people, ran away down an alley like a terrified coward, cowardly hid in a close friend's dusty attic, and was very promptly arrested by the authorities for the major crime of high treason. Now, normally in history, armed treason against the state gets you the immediate death penalty, or, at the very least, a lifetime rotting away in a cold, dark, rat-infested dungeon. But his incredibly creepy, unnatural luck was still aggressively on his side. It turned out the presiding judge at his major criminal trial was actually a massive right-wing nationalist who completely agreed with all of his extreme, hateful political views. So, instead of ordering a firing squad, the sympathetic judge handed Adolf a ridiculously, laughably light 5-year sentence. And he was sent to Landsberg prison, which was basically a luxurious 5-star hotel reserved exclusively for right-wing political prisoners. He had his own bright, comfortable room, a beautiful scenic view out the window, unlimited visiting hours with his friends, and his crazy supporters literally sent him massive gift boxes of expensive chocolates and fresh flowers. It was the absolute worst punishment ever designed. While he was relaxing and enjoying his luxurious, all-expenses-paid vacation behind bars, he realized that violently trying to overthrow the entire government with a handgun was probably not the smartest long-term strategy. Instead, he brilliantly decided to write a massive book. He paced around his comfortable prison cell for hours, angrily dictating his entire frustrating life story and his deeply toxic, incredibly hateful ideologies to his extremely patient, long-suffering secretary. He titled the massive, rambling, completely unreadable brick of a book, Mein Kampf, which literally translates to My Struggle. He fully expected it to be an instant, global literary bestseller. He genuinely thought millions of intelligent people would read his brilliant words and instantly worship his unmatched political intellect. But when it was finally published, absolutely nobody cared. It was a massive, embarrassing, commercial flop. Regular people were simply too busy trying to find enough spare change to buy a single loaf of bread to sit down and read a giant, boring book written by a failed beer hall revolutionary with a very weird mustache. After serving only a pathetic 9 months of his incredibly light 5-year sentence, the incredibly lenient government simply decided to let him go. He proudly walked out of the heavy prison doors a completely free man. And he had a brand new, highly dangerous master plan. If he could not violently take over the entire country by shooting holes in a beer hall ceiling, he would simply have to do it the boring, painfully slow, legal way, through the official democratic voting process. Fast forward a few incredibly unstable years, the infamous Great Depression suddenly hit the entire globe like a massive, unstoppable financial freight train. The fragile German economy, which was already considered a complete global joke, entirely shattered into a million tiny, unfixable pieces. The millions of citizens were far more desperate, deeply angry, and literally starving in the cold streets than ever before. They were completely, utterly exhausted by the weak, totally ineffective democratic government that completely failed to fix their massive problems. And our angry art reject was waiting right there in the shadows, perfectly ready to take full, ruthless advantage of their absolute national misery. Using incredibly loud, aggressive propaganda campaigns, highly dramatic theatrical speeches, and violent squads of angry thugs, ruthlessly beating up his political rivals in the dark streets. His radical political party rapidly gained massive, frightening popularity across the country. By 1933, through a series of completely shady, backroom political deals made by arrogant aristocrats who thought they could easily control him, Adolf was officially appointed Chancellor of Germany. Spoiler alert, they absolutely could not control him. Within months, he completely dismantled the fragile democracy, ruthlessly outlawed all other political parties, and crowned himself the absolute, unquestioned, supreme dictator. He was finally the ultimate boss. And his very first order of business, tearing the dreaded Treaty of Versailles into tiny, meaningless shreds. He immediately started building massive, shiny new tanks, huge battleships, and heavily armed fighter planes in total secret. And by secret, I mean he was practically doing it in broad daylight while loudly humming military tunes. But the victorious Allied powers, specifically Britain and France, desperately wanted to avoid another horrifying, bloody world war. So, they decided to play a brilliant new diplomatic game called appeasement. Here is exactly how appeasement worked in practice. Adolf would aggressively march his fully armed military into a strictly forbidden, demilitarized zone like the Rhineland. The Allies would nervously wag their fingers and say, "Hey, you are absolutely not allowed to be there." And Adolf would confidently reply, "What are you going to do about it? Start a massive war?" The Allies, sweating nervously, would quietly say, "No, please just stay right there and do not take anything else." But of course, he wanted more. He aggressively annexed his entire home country of Austria without firing a single shot. Then, he pointed his greedy finger at a large chunk of Czechoslovakia called the Sudetenland. The British Prime Minister, a very polite gentleman named Neville Chamberlain, desperately flew to Germany to kindly ask him to stop. Adolf looked him dead in the eye and promised, "If you just let me have this one specific piece of land, I swear I will be completely satisfied forever." Chamberlain smiled happily, eagerly signed a worthless piece of paper, flew back to London, and proudly declared he had achieved glorious peace for our time. And what did Adolf do exactly? 6 short months later, he completely ignored the paper and violently swallowed the entire rest of Czechoslovakia. It was exactly like trying to politely negotiate with a starving, highly aggressive wolf by handing it a tiny sausage and hoping it suddenly becomes a vegetarian. Finally, in September 1939, Adolf completely crossed the line. He confidently launched a massive, unstoppable, lightning-fast military invasion straight into the heart of Poland. Britain and France stared in absolute shock at the massive destruction. They finally, slowly realized they had been completely played like absolute fools by a bitter, failed art student. Chamberlain sadly stared at the official war declaration paper on his desk. The absolute worst, most devastating, terrifying conflict in human history had officially begun. Do not let a dictator steal your perfectly good internet time. Quickly smash that subscribe button, brutally crush the like icon, and let me know in the comments if you would have given him a passing grade in art class. See you in the next historical disaster.